Welcome everybody to our Q&A session for the Legumes Fall 2024 grant season. Today we will be answering program-related questions that were asked in last week's kickoff webinar. If you have not had a chance to watch that kickoff webinar yet, I would encourage you to. The recording is posted on our grantee guide webpage, and that webinar gives an overview of the Legumes program and what you need to know to complete your pollinator habitat project this fall. So today, in addition to answering our questions from last week, we may have some time at the end to answer questions. So if you have a question that you'd like to ask during this session, you can use the Q&A feature that's located at the bottom of your screen. If you click that Q&A button, you can type your question and then hit send. You can also upvote questions from other participants if you have the same question by clicking the thumbs up icon next to each question, and that helps us prioritize the most popular questions. This Q&A session will be recorded and emailed to you, as well as posted on the grantee guide afterwards. So if you have to jump off early, that is perfectly fine. Again, just a quick introduction. Most of you probably already met us at last week's webinar or watched the recording, but our Legumes program staff are coming from the Minnesota Board of Water and Soil Resources, Blue Thumb, and Metro Blooms. Today, we have Dan from the Minnesota Board of Water and Soil Resources here, as well as Megan, myself, Alexandra, and Graciela from our Metro Blooms and Blue Thumb team answering your questions today. And we're excited to be talking with you all. A bit on the format of this hour. So first, our staff will be going through the questions from last week. That'll probably take up about 45 minutes or so. We'll go through those as quickly as we can. And then with our remaining time, we'll go through any questions that have come in during this webinar. We have lots of great questions, so we're excited to help guide you in the right direction with your projects. We'll be moving through questions in these categories, starting with planting, site prep, and maintenance. And then we'll get into questions related to eligible expenses and the reimbursement request process. And we'll close out with some specific project challenges people had questions about.
All right, so we'll go ahead and just get started right away with some questions specifically related to planting. So we can go to the next slide. All right, so Megan, we're going to be asking you these questions today. Can I add or expand onto an existing garden for my Lawns to Legumes project?
Yes, you can. There's not a problem with adding to an existing garden. Just remember to take a before and after photo so that our team can see what you've changed.
Perfect. If someone has some non-native plants close to where their project will be, are they required to remove those non-native plants?
No, you are not required to remove those. So while the Legumes program does not reimburse non-natives and cultivars that you might buy, it is okay if you're planting in an area or planting near an area that has existing non-natives or cultivars.
Great. Can funds be used for multiple plantings in different locations on someone's property?
Yes. So it is okay if you want to do your project in multiple spots throughout your yard or property. Again, you'll just need to submit a before and after photo of each area that you planted in.
And is there a minimum or maximum size requirement for a project?
Nope. So your project size can be whatever best fits your space or your capacity. And as we try to emphasize, even a really small container planting can make a difference for pollinators.
Great. This is a question that we get a lot, so we really want to highlight it. How exactly is a native plant defined?
Yeah, so a native plant could be defined in multiple ways. For the purpose of this program, the Lawns Legumes program reimburses plants that are native to the state of Minnesota. And native means that they have lived and flourished in Minnesota's ecosystems for a long time and are adapted to thrive in the conditions here. So to search for native plants that are native to Minnesota, there's a few different tools. We shared them during our webinar last week, so you can refer to that. But we have the plant finder on bluethumb.org, is a database with only native plants, and as well as the plant lists on our resources page are another great resource. And then to verify that a plant is native to Minnesota, you can use an online tool like the Minnesota Wildflowers database or the USDA plants database. And we can share out those links in a bit here.
Yeah, that one's really important. So thank you for sharing that. With the garden viewing, are we required to allow others into our yard? My planting spot is out back in our private gated backyard.
So no, your garden does not need to be in a publicly viewable location. It is okay if it's in a more private area like a backyard. What matters is that the pollinators will still be able to find it.
Yeah, and I just want to emphasize with that one too, like we just have to see your photos. Nobody's gonna come to your garden site to verify everything. Um, Next question. I registered for a pocket planting, but wound up having a larger area than originally planned. Can I still do a meadow even though I signed up for otherwise?
So you do not need to stick to the project that you first indicated interest in when filling out the confirmation form. It's okay if after you do some research, you realize that a different project type might be better for you. When you fill out the reimbursement request form at the end of completing your project, you'll have another opportunity to share what project type you ended up doing.
Great. These are kind of related to plant selection. So my backyard is full sun, full shade. What species would work in those different conditions for different people?
Yeah. So rather than answering all the plants that would work well in those conditions, I'm going to direct you again to our handy plant finder tool. There's these really neat filters where you can search specifically for plants, native plants that do well in full sun, which we typically consider is 6+ hours a day of sun, I believe. And then part sun gets like a few hours of sun a day, and then full shade. There's also a lot of other filters you can use to like soil moisture and soil type as well if you want to really try to optimize. That being said, I want to stress that Minnesota native plants are pretty resilient and adaptable for a wide variety of conditions.
That's a really awesome tool. Thank you for sharing that. This is something we hear a lot too. It would be really great to have a list of trees and shrubs, some with pictures or other than just looking at pictures that are native. Where could I find something like that?
Yeah, so just like with flowering plants, there are a lot of different native, Minnesota native trees and shrubs. We have a couple of pollinator-friendly tree and shrub lists on Blue Thumb's resources page, so I recommend looking at those. And again, with the plant finder, we do have a tree and shrub filter on there as well.
Great. When people are looking to plant a pollinator lawn, oftentimes those seed mixes contain clovers. I thought white clover was a non-native plant. How do I make sure to stay away from non-natives?
Good question. So when it comes to pollinator seed mixes, a lot of the ones used actually do contain white clover and some other non-natives. And we have a list of exceptions on our eligible expenses guide of non-native plants that we do reimburse. And for pollinator lawns, those include white clover, self-heal, creeping thyme, and fescue grasses. And those are all listed on the eligible expenses guide. And the reason why those are included in the mixes is that based on research, They do provide benefit to our native pollinators, and they work really well in that bee lawn setting.
That's great. Another thing I want to say too is that there are some different seed mixes out there, including a U of M native bee lawn seed mix, which has some other plants in there instead that are more native to Minnesota. So that's an option if you're really looking for that. Next question. I'm thinking about planting a boulevard. Are there specific plants that do better with sand or salt from winter?
Yeah, so when it comes to native plants and salt, some native plants are more salt tolerant than others. We do have, again, to promote the Plant Finder, we do have a salt tolerance filter. So you can find a list. Many of those more dry prairie grasses and flowers have a high salt tolerance. So in general, Minnesota native plants will do better with road salt exposure versus other plants. Um, and yeah, we encourage you to use that. We also do have a blog post on Blue Thumb, if you go back a little bit, that talks a bit more about the effect of de-icing salt on plants and some tips for reducing your de-icing usage during the winter.
Fabulous. This one's fun. Could you address if or when a controlled burn would be good for native plants? If we are considering using fire for management, where can we find information on local rules and local organizations or service providers that can assist us?
Yeah, so most launch legumes plantings, just because of their smaller size, are not necessarily going to benefit from burning over like routine clipping and other regular cleanup. But if you have a larger prairie planting, it could definitely benefit from prescribed burning, and your city or county environmental staff would be the best resource to contact that about local rules. Um, and then in many cases as well, just mowing in late spring can be a good alternative to burning. Um, there are a number of Minnesota native nurseries and contractors that focus on restoration that have some experience with fire management. And we do list a couple of those through the Blue Thumb Partner Finder, which is on the Blue Thumb website if you'd like to look into that.
Um, do you have any specific tips for installing a bee lawn in the fall?
Yeah, so rather than sharing all of those tips here, I'm going to encourage you to check out our Pollinator Lawns project webinar, which will be next Monday evening on July 29, or watch the recording for that. James Wolfen from Twin City Seed Company will be going in lots of detail on seasonally specific advice for getting a bee lawn in the autumn. In general, though, there's two good windows to install a plant bee lawn at this time. One is around mid-August through mid-September, and then one is what we call a dormant seeding, kind of more getting into November, just to give you a preview on thinking about timeline. You can also check out the Turf Alternatives webpage on our website. It's under the Learn tab in Plan a Project if you want to look at that as well.
Great. Lots of great resources. Next up, if we are seeding, how can we be sure we're not buying seeds that have been treated with chemicals or covered in a plastic coating?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the first place I would direct you to is just our recommended native plant nurseries and retailers list. All of the locations on there we've vouched for and are not using chemicals or coating their seeds with chemicals. Alternatively, it should typically say on the label of the product whether or not the seeds have been treated with a coating. So I recommend just reading the label and reaching out to the retailer if it's not clear.
If we are buying plants now and some of them are alive, should we plant those earlier to get the roots established?
Um, so it could go both ways. We would generally recommend waiting until like more the fall planting season, which is considered late August through early October to plant. But if you do have like plugs that you bought now, You can definitely plant them and make sure you're watering them regularly during kind of these more hotter weeks of summer. It is raining a lot right now, so you might not have to water that much. But there's benefits to both ways. Planting now does allow more time for root growth, but it just takes a bit more care and attention if you're doing it before that fall planting window.
Great. And then I think this is our last question in this section. Will there be more information on how to increase pollinator habitat for selective nesters, such as native ground bees? For example, patches of bare dirt for bees or salt puddles for butterflies.
Yeah, so this is a great point. Beyond pollen and nectar from native plants, our native pollinators also need things like water and shelter to thrive. The Lawns to Legumes program specifically focuses on adding flowering plants, so we can create both habitat and resources, but engaging in those additional actions is also essential to supporting pollinators. For resources on that, the Xerxes Society, I know, has a lot of great information on their website for creating overwintering habitat for pollinators. And we do here at Blue Thumb regularly share this more general pollinator support information on our social media and our blog posts. So we just encourage you to engage with us and learn from us in that way. Okay, so now we'll be changing roles here a bit. I will be asking Dan some questions related to site prep. So Dan, could you address what the fastest way to prep your site would be, and if people need to amend their soil before planting?
Well, the fastest site preparation method is to manually remove existing sod or vegetation with a sod cutter. Turning and raking the soil after removing the sod and then applying a layer of mulch before planting can help suppress weeds. If you have extra compacted or nutrient depleted soil, it can be helpful to amend the soil with compost. Just amending that over the top layer of soil and also in the holes that you dig for each plug that you plant.
Yeah. And I do want to add to that, amending your soil is not always going to be necessary, just because, as we've kind of hinted at before, native plants are pretty resilient in to those more drier and sandy soils. But if you have like especially compacted soil, that can be just a great way to give your plants a boost as they're first establishing. All right, is there still time to use sheet mulching as a site prep method if you're doing a fall planting?
Well, it's most effective if you can do it for a couple months, but if you start now, there should be enough time to do the sheet mulching and then still plant in October.
Great. And then do we need to worry about reusing cardboard that has ink when sheet mulching?
That's a good question. So when sheet mulching, you'll want to remove all the labels and tape from the cardboard. Making sure it's not coated cardboard as well is important. And there is a Xerxes Society guide to organic site preparation that provides good information, which we'll put that into the chat.
Awesome. And then how do you prepare a garden if you're doing a more of like a mix of both plugs, but perhaps a dormant seeding as well? Would you still use mulch in that scenario?
We recommend planting plugs first and then sowing seed. The seed needs good seed to soil contact, and many of the really tiny seeds of the flowers need light to germinate. So we recommend not covering those. There's a landscape designer, Benjamin Vogt, that has a good article about planting or seeding gardens, and we'll put that link into the chat as well.
And then do we have to necessarily use mulch? This person in particular had a planting area at the bottom of a small hill, and they were worried about mulch soaking up too much water, and they were wondering about that.
Mulch isn't essential. Mulch is really helpful on slopes. It really helps stabilize slopes and hold moisture where there might not be much moisture. If it's at a bottom of a hill where it might be wet, you don't need to use wood chips. You might end up doing more weeding though, if you're not going to be using any type of cover along with the plants.
Okay. And then is it recommended to apply a layer of organic landscaping fabric or paper after you clear your site before adding any soil or mulch?
It's not essential for a successful planting. We recommend looking into it if you're dealing with a slope site that has erosion challenges, or as a site prep method to smother weeds before planting. It can be really effective just as another layer to suppress any weeds that are present.
Got it. And then last one for this section, this person uses grass clippings as mulch and a weed barrier in their vegetable gardens and is wondering if it would be a sufficient source of mulch for these sort of native plant projects as well, or if we'd recommend wood mulch instead.
I think we'd still recommend wood mulch. Wood mulch lasts a long time. It holds moisture in well, really suppresses the weeds well. In some cases, clippings can hold too much moisture and can lead to some fungus issues. So wood mulch is still our preference.
All right, thanks.
Looks like next I'll be asking Alexandra a few questions.
Take it away, Dan.
Okay, so the first question is, my yard is full of weeds, but now I'm wondering, aren't weeds just plants that people find ugly or undesirable? How do I go about finding out what are native weeds versus non-native weeds?
This is a great question. As you're starting off with native plants, a lot of people feel this pressure. So, weeds essentially are just plants that aren't in a place where you want them. So, a weed in one place might not be considered a weed somewhere else. The thing to consider is that whatever is growing in your garden might become a weed, become a problematic plant when they start taking over and preventing the plants that you had put in from thriving. At that point, they need to be managed to protect the purpose of the planting, like your pollinator planting. If it becomes just a monoculture, that's not helpful. So for help telling apart weeds from the native plants that you want, you can label your plants, your native plants, as you're putting them in with something like a popsicle stick or other plant labels that you can write on. You can also take advantage of using free plant ID apps like PlantNet or Seek by iNaturalist. Those can be really good when you're out in the yard at the time. Blue Thumb also has developed an All About Weeds zine as another resource, which is just a really fun resource talking through weeds, kind of their space in our gardens and some common ones you'll find. And then for more tips, definitely recommend checking out the Blue Thumb blog post that was done recently, specifically on weeds in pollinator gardens.
Okay, thanks, Alexandra. We have one more maintenance question. How do you quantify 1 inch of water? So we recommend 1 inch of water being applied onto plantings each week, and that could be rainfall as well, but recommending that the plants need that much.
Yeah. So there are a couple of different ways to track it. The easiest way, obviously, is to measure. And so some of the measuring tools you can use are like a rain gauge that's out near your planting. If you don't have a rain gauge, you can use like an aluminum can. You can get like a tuna can and mark 1 inch with like a Sharpie or something on the inside and go and check that space in your garden. And then just know that how much you need to supplement with watering changes depending on how much rain we're getting. And you can always check your soils too. If you're sticking your finger down into your soil and noticing it's really sandy and dry, might be a good indication that your planting could use a little bit more water. All right, I guess I am going to take over the question asking now. So, Megan, we're going to be going over some eligible expense questions with you.
All right.
The first one, do plants have to be purchased from the recommended sellers, or if they're native and bought elsewhere, is that acceptable?
Yeah, so our native plant nurseries list is a list of suggested locations, but you are welcome to shop from other retailers if you prefer. The one thing I would caution when shopping from native plants from chain stores and other retailers is that they do tend to sell more cultivars of natives, which are not reimbursable. We have details on the grantee guide about this and cover it in last week's webinar. Um, if you're having trouble finding a nursery from our list near you, you can always choose to buy your plants from a retailer that offers statewide delivery, and the program does reimburse delivery expenses. And we do indicate to those retailers that offer delivery on our native plants nurseries list.
Excellent. This next one about trees and using them. I know that trees are available for reimbursement. Can you talk about the requirements for using trees in projects? Do they need to be flowering trees, native, seedlings, mature trees? What's the deal?
Yeah. So all Minnesota native trees and shrubs are eligible for Lawns Legumes reimbursement. The key there is that they must be native to the state of Minnesota and that they're not cultivated varieties. They can be seedlings or mature trees, and while they don't necessarily have to be flowering, we do recommend that you choose native trees that best support pollinators. And we have a list of some pollinator-friendly recommended trees on our resources page.
Amazing. What sort of contractor work is reimbursable under the grant?
Yeah, so really any type of site prep, design, or installation work where you're paying another person to do that work for you can be reimbursable. They can be a contractor, they can also be like a neighbor or friend if you're paying them. We'll just need some sort of documentation that shows how much was paid and what the payment was for.
Great. We get a lot of questions about what type of mulch to use. This person is wondering, is cocoa bean shell mulch an acceptable reimbursable mulch?
Yeah, so it is. Any type of mulch can be reimbursed. Non-dyed mulch is preferred just because that is a bit better for the environment. And we recommend double shredded hardwood mulch or just shredded hardwood mulch because it stays in place well. It won't get washed away with like a rain event. Um, and just keeping sustainability in mind too, there's some mulch such as cypress mulch that we do strongly discourage because types that are more local are better, but any type can be reimbursed.
Great. Are materials for a path considered reimbursable if used as a cue for care?
So no path materials in themselves would not be reimbursable, but if you're using material as part of edging, like stone edging or giving your planting a border, the program can reimburse for that.
Great. Would a $55 membership to the St. Paul Tool Library to rent a tool for soil removal be a qualifying expense?
Yes, we could consider a tool library membership as under that equipment rental expense umbrella. So you can be reimbursed for any sort of equipment that you're renting.
Fabulous. When using chip drop, which is a very common way to get some cheap mulch, there's an option to pay $20 to cover the fee for the arborist. Is this considered a reimbursable expense?
Yes, we could consider that like a type of delivery or contractor fee. Chip drop is a great option. They do give you a lot of mulch, so maybe you want to post in the hive that you have some to share with others. Could be a good route to take for that.
Can we purchase seeds for winter sowing, like sowing the seeds in milk jugs, if they won't be germinated or planted in the ground until spring 2025?
So unfortunately not. Your seeds must be on the ground for it to be considered like a completed project. So we wouldn't be able to reimburse seeds just put in milk jugs. That being said, if you want to do a dormant seeding and put them down on your yard or lands, that could be an acceptable project.
Great. We hear this a lot too. I have a lot of deer in my neighborhood. Is using deer out or liquid fence or Repellix okay or reimbursable?
Yeah, so the Launch Legumes program does reimburse fencing material for herbivore protection. So that could be things like chicken wire or stakes, or some people use like mesh baskets to place over their plants. However, the program does not reimburse these types of repellents. If you choose to use these, you can, but we would not be able to reimburse them. And then another point is that we'd recommend, if you deal with a lot of deer or rabbits or squirrels, you could select native plants that are a bit more herbivore resistant than others that won't tend to be as munched on. We do have a filter for that in the Blue Thumb Plant Finder. So that's a great tool you can use.
Yeah, that tool just keeps getting better and better. What if a store doesn't have all of the name specifics on a plant, just the common name? So it doesn't give information to know if it's a cultivar or not.
Yeah, so in general, if you just see that one common name, or the scientific name, which is like those two words in Latin, then it's most likely a native plant. What gives a cultivar away is if it has like an additional name, most often in quotations. Sometimes it'll have like the little trademark or R symbol by it. It'll often be kind of a funny or whimsical sounding name. Um, in that case, if that is appended to the name, it's most likely a cultivar. Um, I would recommend checking out a handout we have on the grantee guide. It's called Native Plants versus Cultivars, and it gives actually some example tags so you can kind of practice telling the difference. And if there's a situation where you're really not sure, you can always email the L2L helpline with a photo of the tag, and we can verify for you whether or not it's a cultivar and whether or not it's reimbursable.
And last one in this section, I'm afraid that most nurseries are likely out of native plants and native trees by now. What happens if there's nothing left to buy?
Yeah, so this is a common question that we get from our fall participants. So it's true that there's fewer plants available kind of right now in the middle of the summer. However, many native plant nurseries refresh their stock for the fall, actually, so around August and September. And there's some perks to buying native plants in the fall too. They're generally a little bit bigger, so they kind of have a head start. And then also they're sometimes discounted too, so you can get them at a cheaper rate. Okay, Alexandra and I will be switching roles here, and I will be asking some questions related to support people can get on their projects. So is there an opportunity to have a one-on-one conversation about what a person wants to do with a yard, like a one-time consultation, just so they can make sure they're heading in the right direction?
Yeah, so I would definitely recommend filling out our coaching survey that went out with the recording of last week's webinar. A volunteer coach, if you're matched with one, can provide that type of support. One thing I will say is they love to check back in with you throughout the season. So even if you want to have just a one-time conversation, just letting them know when you've wrapped up your project and that you did a great, you completed it and it looks great. They love to hear that. The other thing that I will say too is that if you're doing a more intensive project or it's slightly bigger, you can also look into doing consultations with design firms right now. A lot of design contractors will do, or sometimes even master gardeners will do one-on-one conversations just to help get you moving in the right direction on a project.
Awesome. Will Blue Thumb or Metro Blooms have staff at the state fair to help us review our designs or plant choices?
Yeah, so Blue Thumb has a native plant garden exhibit right outside the Eco Experience building at the State Fair, which is happening this year from August 22nd to September 2nd. We would love to see you there if you haven't visited before. We have a number of different volunteers who staff the booth, including some staff, Blue Thumb partners, sometimes Lawns to Legumes coaches as well. But the thing we want to emphasize is there are a lot of people at the fair, and there are a lot of people that come to talk to us. So while we're really happy to chat with you, to have a short conversation, we're likely just not going to have the time or space to look over a plan and really help you make decisions in that way. So try and find another avenue to get a hold of us, but we'd be really happy to see you there.
I look forward to seeing everybody, and I look forward to going to the fair. Is there a way to see the location of this year's Lawns to Legumes participants? Hoping to meet some others in their area, maybe even in person.
Yeah, we know that there's a lot of want and desire for some community building around these projects, but for privacy reasons, we can't share the exact addresses of other participants. Instead, we would encourage you to join the Hive. There are some regional groups in the Hive that you can post out and see if there's others in your area who would like to connect.
Great.
Okay, I'm jumping back in here to ask Megan a few questions about reimbursement requests. First, Megan, for before and after pictures, should we wait until plants grow in more, or is it okay to take those before now, or those photos now?
Yeah, so you can, for the before photo, you can take your photo anytime before you plant. And for the after photo, it's okay if you take it immediately after planting. You don't need to wait until your new plants have grown in. It's mainly just so our staff can see that you completed your project. And that goes for seeds too. Your seeds will not have germinated and sprouted if you're doing a seeding project. We just want to see that you got your seeds on the ground.
Thanks, Megan. So once receipts have been submitted and we still are we still able to make more purchases and submit more receipts before the official deadline? Or are we only allowed to submit receipts all at once, all at one time?
Yeah, so we would ask that you just submit one reimbursement request that contains all of your receipts and your photos, just because our team reviews each one, and then you'll be getting one reimbursement check after your request has been approved by us.
And our last question in this section, what is the turnaround for reimbursements?
Yeah, so you'll be first filling out the reimbursement request form. Once you've submitted that, our team will be reviewing and hopefully approving it. And then we go through a process of mailing your reimbursement check to you. And that usually happens at the beginning of whatever the next month is. And then it takes a couple of weeks to arrive at your mailing address. So it kind of depends on the time of the month that you submit your request. If you submit it at the end of the month, you'll likely receive it a bit sooner, but it'll take a few weeks for us to get that in the mail to you. You'll receive more information about this, but just a heads up, the check will arrive in an envelope from bill.com, which is the service that we use to process the checks. It won't be from Blue Thumb or Metro Blooms. So just make sure that you're watching your mail for that when that time comes. Okay, so we're moving on to the, oh, it looks like we have one more here on the reimbursable expenses question. My apologies.
So one more question. Can the L2L helpline review my planned purchases before I submit for reimbursement?
Yeah, thanks, Dan. We can, with a kind of catch that we ask you to kind of use your other resources before just sending us a list of all of your purchases via the helpline. So if you're not sure about something, talk with your coach. If you have a coach, go to the Hive. And then we're always happy to verify if something's eligible if you're not sure, if, for example, if it's a cultivar or not. It looks like we got a couple more in here, if you don't
Okay.
mind asking these, Dan.
Yeah. So if we know for 100% certainty that a free transplant is native to Minnesota, how should it be documented, or does it need to be documented at all for the L2L program, since there is no retail receipt?
Yeah, so most of you might be buying your native plants from nurseries or retailers, but if you found a different way to get your native plants, for example, a friend has some native plants that they want to offer you, and you're not sure whether it's native, we do ask that you verify that with whoever you're getting the plant is from. And then even though you're not necessarily submitting a receipt, there will be a place in the form where you can submit just name of the list of plants that you acquired, because our team wants to be able to tell that you added native plants to your project in some way.
And then next question, someone said that most of the reimbursement must be for plants. Is there a required ratio for that?
Yeah, so with the Launch Legumes program, we ask that the main focus of your project is on creating pollinator habitat through the addition of native plants. At this point, the program doesn't have like a required minimum or proportion of the amount of your purchases for native plants. We just want to be able to tell that you did include them as the focus of your project. The reason why we don't have a minimum is that if you're doing a project where your native plants are much less expensive, like if you're using seeds or if you got them free, we recognize that some people might be not spending quite as much. But again, just make sure that your focus of your project is that incorporation of native plants. Okay, now we are moving on to our project challenges questions. I'll be asking these and Dan will be answering. Okay, so my main issue in my yard is that the white grubs are eating the grass roots. Any advice for how they should approach their project?
Well, grubs can be a definite challenge. Deep-rooted native plants can help control grubs. Most often, grubs are most interested in eating shallow-rooted turf grasses, not the native plants. Adding longer-rooted turf alternatives, such as fescues, can also help. If the grub damage is severe, you might want to consider planting in an alternative area or reaching out to a business that specializes in organic lawn care. There's several Blue Thumb partners that do specialize in that type of lawn care, and there's a Blue Thumb partner list.
Yeah, great, thank you. And then this person is trying to garden in an area where a birch tree was removed 3 years ago. Where can they find info about like whether the roots might leave something in the soil or any tips for planting?
Yeah, the roots shouldn't cause any problems. The native plants are adapted to growing in and around tree roots, even if they're dead roots. Probably the biggest challenge will be planting in around the roots. So it's helpful to select smaller plants, like in plug containers, where it's easier to dig a hole and then plant the plant in amongst the roots.
Sounds good. How do I deal with jumping worms?
Jumping worms are another big issue, and so jumping worms are an invasive worm species. They strip the topsoil of nutrients and inhibit plant growth. They spread through dirt and sod or in mulch or in compost piles that are stored in an area where they can spread into them. To avoid bringing jumping worms into your garden, purchase mulch that's been heat treated to 150 degrees. If a yard or garden is known to have jumping worms, it's safest to not accept plants or garden materials from that location. If you already have jumping worms in your garden, there's some good resources about still planting gardens in those areas. There's a resource through the UMN extension that has many tips for coping with them. So we can put that into the chat.
Okay, great. This person has a large population of rabbits in their neighborhood, like many of us do. Is there a way to find native plants that are rabbit resistant?
Well, some native plants don't get nibbled as much. These include plants in the mint family and the onion family. So this includes wild bergamot is a mint, giant hyssop is another mint species, prairie onion is a native onion species. Plants that are rough or prickly or hairy also don't get nibbled as much by rabbits. So black-eyed Susan is a good example of a really fuzzy plant. And you can also use the herbivore sensitivity filter in the Blue Thumb plant finder to find plants that are resistant.
Great. All right. What are some ways somebody can just work with spreading invasive species in their yard? Should they plant around them? Should they try to remove them all? Any advice for that?
Um, well, it can if you have time to do the removal, that can be a good step to remove them and then replace them with the native plants. I guess the one caution is just make sure that you have good control of those invasives, and then that's where it's a good idea to use wood mulch as well to suppress any invasives that would want to come up from seed. But we do recommend replacing invasives with native vegetation when you can.
Got it. This person lives in a city that does some street truck mosquito spraying. Do they need to locate their project farther away from that?
Well, spray applications are tricky because of potential drifts that can happen from them. So we do recommend locating projects further away from the street, such as in the backyard. That would be an ideal location, both for the plants and for the pollinators that would be coming to the plants.
Got it. This person has a boulevard that's kind of mounded. How far do they need to dig into their boulevard so that it can capture storm water?
We recommend lowering the boulevard about 3 inches below the grade of the curb and the sidewalk so that stormwater can flow from the sidewalk into that boulevard. It's a really good practice to capture water, keep it from running off, in addition to having the native plants.
Okay. And then related, are there resources to help somebody figure out where to place a rain garden if they want to do a rain garden as part of their project?
Yeah, there's a few key considerations for placing a rain garden. First, look for a spot that is a minimum of 10 feet away from a basement foundation. Avoid trees, stay out of the drip line. The roots generally extend at least as far as the leaves above them. That way you won't be damaging roots as you're digging. Avoid utility lines and septic tanks. Call 811 to locate underground utility-owned lines and equipment. Direct downspouts, sump pump outlets, and or driveway water runoff into the rain garden. So look for areas where you can divert that water into your garden. And then the Blue Thumbs Rain Gardens page is a really good resource for more rain garden installation. And we can put that link into the chat as well.
Great. All right, I believe this is the last one. Is it possible to have a pollinator garden or yard when you have pets or kids or people who are going to be moving through that area?
Yeah, definitely. A few considerations here. One is locate your plantings in an area that's away from foot traffic and paw traffic, like along the edges of your yard, or do a container garden is another option. You can choose taller perennial plants or shrubs that will discourage traffic near them. And then you can also fence your plantings while they're still small. Quite often that's helpful just to make sure that they don't get trampled as they're establishing. So it's good to fence them off for a while or put something over the top of them.
Okay. All right, I can take on these last couple of miscellaneous ones here. So do I need to buy a stake for my yard sign, and what kind do I need? Yes, so you will be getting just the circular lawns legumes sign once you complete your project, but you will need to get a stake for it. If you want to get a stake ahead of time, the program can reimburse for that. The yard sign will come with a couple of drill holes in it. So really it's up to you what type of stake you want. Some people get creative. You can get a wood one, you can get a metal one. And most hardware stores have those available. Okay, so that concludes the questions from our that were previously asked, and now we're going to move on to some of the questions that have come in the Q&A. So Graciela, if you wouldn't mind reading us some of those popular questions that came in, and we'll do our best to answer those here in our last 10 minutes or so.
Yeah, for sure. The first one we have is, if the garden is in the backyard, what should be the placement for the sign that we get?
Good question. So it's really up to you. Most people put their sign like right by their planting. But if you want to kind of share with your neighbors about the program and you want to start conversations with people who walk by, then you can put it in the front yard. We don't have any specific requirements around that.
Awesome. A good question here is, when do you stop watering in the fall?
I can take that question. So if you're planting later in the fall, we do recommend that you water your plants in pretty well, because they do need moisture going into the fall, or else the roots can dry up. Once the ground freezes up, then you really don't need to do any more watering. So that would really be the point where you can stop watering.
Thank you. This is a question to what we answered similarly earlier, but just to reiterate, a couple folks mentioned that they are going to plant soon, but they haven't been impressed with the plants available in July. Could they order the plants for spring delivery and then plant them in late May 2025?
Yeah, so I can answer this one. So you wouldn't be able to order them for next spring just because the project deadline is November 30. I would recommend if you're looking at pre-ordering, some nurseries are doing pre-orders now for fall. And then on a case-by-case basis, we do offer extensions for folks, but that's usually if they're dealing with like an injury or like a personal situation. In that case, you can reach out to the L2L helpline. But in terms of fall planting, I would say either wait a few more weeks for that fall stock to really start back up, or you can do a pre-order now for a fall delivery of plants.
Awesome, thank you. Another one says, for raised beds, is there any worry about deeper freezing when starting from seed in the fall?
I can go ahead and take that. So with seeding in particular, the seeds of our native plants oftentimes need to go through freeze thaw cycles, and they don't need to be, in a raised bed. Most of the time the seeds are still going to be on the surface. They don't need to be in a deep portion of your soils for that freeze thaw cycle to begin. So if you're doing a dormant seeding like that, I wouldn't be very concerned about the depth of the freeze that they're achieving.
Awesome, thank you, Alexandra. This one was already answered by John, thank you, but I just want everybody to hear this. A few grantees asked about if they were awarded, are they able to reapply for the grant?
Good question. So if you've already been awarded, unfortunately, you cannot reapply to get a second grant. And the reason why is just because demands for the Lost Lagoons program is really high, and we want to make sure that as many people as possible have the chance to do a pollinator habitat project. That being said, if you're looking to continue with your project, there are some other potential funding opportunities available. Lots of local watershed districts, some soil and water conservation districts offer like local grants for native planting projects. So I would recommend checking out with some of your local organizations and seeing what's available to you there.
Awesome, thank you. A grantee asked, any suggestions for planting native flowers on a steep slope?
I can take that one.
Oh, go ahead.
Well, with steep slopes, I think that's where it's helpful to have some wood mulch to hold the plants or just to hold the soils in place. Sometimes it's helpful to do a little bit of terracing with your planting holes, and that'll be a place where water can collect as the water is coming down the slope. And so it can just be a little bit of a terrace that you create where you plant your hole. It could be a bigger terrace if you're doing trees and shrubs on a slope. And so that can be a good way to help capture some of that water that might otherwise run off. But otherwise, using wood chips is helpful just to create more stabilization.
I think the one other thing I wanted to add there too is if you're looking to stabilize your slope, a lot of the times our designers like to use like shrubs along the slope just because they're deep root systems and kind of constant existence. They're not going to die away in the winter. They really help to prevent erosion and hold that slope in place.
Awesome, thank you both. Next question says, do you have any filters or resources for native plants that are non-toxic to dogs?
I can take this as probably the resident person with the most dogs in their house right now. We currently don't have a filter for that. I will say that there, like with some searching, you can find some pretty good information. And just knowing to like, how much your dogs like to interact with your garden is going to be really important. There are some things that even if they're not toxic to dogs, their seeds can be really prickly and can cause some concern. So thinking about where you can site your garden if you're wanting to use some of those plants that maybe your dogs don't have access to. But I promise there are a lot of really great native plants out there that you can use in those situations.
Thank you, Alexandra. Next question. I have horticultural vinegar for Creeping Charlie, which has taken over my lawn. Is it okay to spray the border around the garden to discourage the Creeping Charlie, or just weed more regularly?
I can take that question. Creeping Charlie, it's definitely a challenge in lots of yards. And if it's next to your planting, I think our recommendation would be to do some additional mulching on the edge of your garden just to create a bit of a buffer there between the area where there's Creeping Charlie potentially wanting to move in and actually mounting that up a little bit just to create that barrier. Probably having some more aggressive native plants on the edge there will be helpful as well, just to provide more competition if the Creeping Charlie does come in. The Creeping Charlie will stay low to the ground, but it can get shaded out or outcompeted if there's some more aggressive native plants there.
Thank you, Dan. This is a site prep question that we probably answered earlier, but it has a few upvotes, so I just wanted to bring it up. It asks, can you use landscape fabric underneath the hardwood mulch to help suppress weeds?
I can take this one as well. So we do recommend organic landscape fabric. So there's like paper-based products that can work well as a fabric underneath wood chips. We don't recommend the cloth or synthetic ones. Probably a lot of you have experience with those, and they seem to show up again at some point. And so they're hard to work with. The plants have a hard time spreading as well through that type of fabric. The other material will break down over time and allow plants to spread, where the synthetic fabrics won't allow for that.
And I think we have time for one more question.
All right. A grantee asked, there is so much good info in this Q&A, that will be lost once I close the Zoom session. Is there any way to transfer this info in a summary that comes with the Zoom recording?
Yeah, so we'll be updating the FAQ and the grantee guide. It's all the way at the bottom of the page with questions that were asked that we feel like it's important to share info on, and other ones we didn't get to. And if you asked a question that we didn't get to today, please reach out either to the Hive or the L2L helpline. Graciela put the email in there a few minutes ago, and we can make sure that we get your question answered. All right, well, I think, thank you, Graciela, for reading through some of those. We've reached the top of the hour. So thanks again, everybody, for being here. I hope that you have fun just planning out your projects and getting your hands in the dirt. We're here to support you. So again, please reach out if you need help and use the many resources that we have on our website. Again, we'll be sharing this recording by email, and it'll be posted on our website too. And I hope that everybody has a good rest of their day.
Thanks for your efforts, everyone.